What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another New York Giants video, and today I'm going to discuss multiple things. First, the news broke early this morning that Giants former head coach Joe Judge will be taking a new job as an offensive assistant back home at his stomping grounds in New England with the Patriots, as he'll look to rebuild his coaching resume there. And the second thing that I'm really excited about, the Giants land Don Wink Martindale as their new defensive coordinator to replace Patrick Graham, who was previously our DC for the past two seasons. Folks, before I dive into these two topics, make sure to go check us out on all of our social media platforms below, on Instagram, Twitter, and our YouTube channel at Big Blue Avenue. Appreciate all the support we've gotten on the last couple of videos. And first, let's discuss Joe Judge returning to the New England Patriots. Now, before Joe Judge became head coach of the Giants, he was previously with the Patriots for 8 seasons. And his impressive resume under Bill Belichick and Nick Saban were the two primary reasons why Joe Judge became head coach of the New York Giants. A lot of people compared Joe Judge to Bill Parcells, Tom Coughlin. Joe Judge a little bit too young, in my opinion. The biggest difference between him and those guys was Joe Judge came to the organization at 38 years old. Tom Coughlin and Bill Parcells were much older. Not light years older, but pretty much those were two legendary coaches. Joe Judge is still relatively young and jumped from the special teams coordinator / wide receivers coach to head coach. Now he's going back to the Patriots as an offensive assistant to help develop Mac Jones further. Now it's interesting because the Raiders were also interested in Joe Judge and hiring him as their special teams coordinator. Obviously, Rich Bisaccia, who was their special teams coordinator last year, got promoted to interim head coach. And now Bisaccia is with the Green Bay Packers. So they were looking for a new coordinator. Plus, there was rumored some familiarity there with Patrick Graham heading there as the Raiders' new defensive coordinator and Josh McDaniels being their new head coach, since McDaniels, Graham, and Judge were all former assistants for the New England Patriots. So Joe Judge, when he got fired, Joe Judge was weighing his options out, wanted to take some time off. It was rumored he may even possibly take the year off. But we know Joe Judge has connections in the NFL, and his biggest connection is with Bill Belichick. He wanted to help get more of a veteran, offense to help Mac Jones out after losing Josh McDaniels. And Joe Judge could be that guy. Now, this is where it gets interesting because the Giants' offense ranked 31st for 2 straight years under Joe Judge. And now, granted, it was rumored that Joe Judge wanted Brian Daboll as his offensive coordinator. It's funny now that Daboll's the head coach and Joe Judge is no longer here. But at the end of the day, guys and gals, I wish Joe Judge all the best of success back in New England. And I pretty much was one of the few people standing in the defense of Joe Judge up until the very end, up until his firing, because I thought that Joe Judge should have never been under the same timeline as Dave Gettleman. I wanted him to get a third year under a new GM. Unfortunately, it did not work out that way. And I do think the Giants made the right decision, but that doesn't mean that I have to agree with the firing of Joe Judge. And what I mean by that is I respect the Giants' decision to get in a new GM to handpick his head coach. But at the same time, I wish that GM would have picked Joe Judge to give him just a chance, because I feel like ownership forced a lot of people on him. For instance, Jason Garrett, and Garrett had ties with Mark Colombo. Joe Judge kind of got screwed out there, and he turned out to be, criticized for a lot more of the offensive woes than he should have. Ultimately, that led to Joe Judge's firing, a porous offense that lacked depth. You could also blame the general manager, Dave Gettleman, for that. But all the best to Joe Judge. I'm going to miss him, and best of luck back home in New England. Now, next up, moving on, Giants hire Don Wink Martindale as their new defensive coordinator. Previously, the defensive coordinator the past 4 seasons for the Baltimore Ravens. And I'm going to break this hiring down, what I think it means for the Giants, what I think it means for them as far as the draft is concerned and free agency. So Wink and the Ravens parted ways earlier this year, and he was the defensive coordinator for 4 seasons. And Wink had a lot of success in Baltimore as the defensive coordinator. and he paid his dues. He was their linebackers coach from 2012 to 2017. He then moved up. Um, and a lot of people say, oh, well, Wink got fired. Really, what happened was the team parted ways with him back on January 21st after the two sides couldn't reach an agreement on a 1-year extension until through 2023. But the media is going to portray this as, oh, Wink got fired. His defense sucked. Don't hire him, this and that. No, Wink is actually a really good defensive coordinator. The problem was the Ravens were decimated with injuries this year. They were the most injury-plagued team in football, probably outside of the Giants, and they still managed to win 8 football games. So, and Wink brings over a lot of experience. Now, he was the defensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos in 2010. He also got his coaching start with the then known as Oakland Raiders. He was their linebackers coach from 2004 to 2008. Now, this past season, 2021, Baltimore had the 25th ranked defense. Why? Well, Marcus Peters was hurt. They lost him. They lost Marlon Humphrey. Their 2 starting corners were gone. They lost Derek Wolfe at one point to an injury as well. Again, this was a team that really struggled depth-wise to find replacements for these all-pro corners. And Wink Martindale builds his defense off a great secondary because he's a blitz guru. The blitz rate for Baltimore is, over the past 4 years, it's higher than any other team in the NFL on average, not just by a margin, by a wide margin. You look at what Wink's defense in Baltimore did his first 3 years as defensive coordinator. They were number 1 in 2018, number 1 defense in the league. 2019, they were number 4. 2020, they were number 7. They also finished top 3 in fewest points during Wink's first 3 years as DC. This past season, it was much different. Again, when you're missing 2 of your starting corners, you're not going to have as much success. The Ravens allowed the second most yards per game in the franchise's 26-year history. So yes, do people have the right to be concerned with this hire? Yes. Do people have the right to think this was a plan B hire after Patrick Graham left for Las Vegas? Of course. But I also know a crowd of Giants fans that were complaining about Patrick Graham's defensive philosophy this past year, that the defense was too soft. There wasn't enough pressure being applied. It was a bend but don't break defense. And this is me playing devil's advocate here because I'm a big fan of Patrick Graham. I would have loved to have kept him as the defensive coordinator, but I think Wink Martindale is slightly more aggressive. And I think Baltimore's defense over the past few years has been better than the Giants' defense has. Maybe not this year. I mean, both the Giants and Ravens defenses this year I think the Giants were a little bit better, partially because of the injuries Baltimore was dealing with. But there's a lot of history between Wink Martindale and the Giants that you folks may not know about. He was actually linked to Brian Daboll during the interviewing process when Daboll was interviewing for head coach. He mentioned that he'd consider bringing in Wink as a possible defensive coordinator. Smart man, because Wink interviewed for the Giants head coaching position back in 2020 that ultimately went to Joe Judge, and Wink was pretty bummed out he did not get that head coaching job. Now, the Giants interviewed several candidates for this position. I'm a little surprised they didn't touch the name Vic Fangio. That would have been my number 1 option to replace Patrick Graham. Wink is a close second. We're literally talking 1A and 1B right here between Fangio and Martindale. I'm just looking back at what Fangio did with the 49ers in 2012 and the Chicago Bears in 2018. I mean, that man was insane with his defenses, and he had a pretty damn good one in Denver. So, Giants also interviewed Jim Schwartz, who was a senior defensive assistant for the Philadelphia Eagles, former defensive coordinator in his own right. Terrell Austin, who got promoted to defensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steve Wilks, former head coach for the Cardinals for 1 year back in 2018. For the defensive coordinator position, I believe he's currently at Missouri. He's their DC, which I mentioned in a previous video. And I think the other was Sean Desai. He was the Bears DC in 2021. And the Bears defense, similar to the Giants, is what kept them in a lot of games this season. The Bears, Robert Quinn had a monstrous season sack-wise. They have a good front with Bilal Nichols, Eddie Goldman. I mean, pretty solid defense. But ultimately, it's going to be Martindale, and he is known for his ultra-aggressive style. And what that means is that while he was DC of the Ravens, they regularly ranked amongst the highest blitzing teams in football. They had the sixth highest blitz rate in 2021. Their blitz frequency rate was number one in 2019 by over 11%, which is crazy. They blitzed about 54.5% of the time. The second team that blitzed the most behind them was Tampa Bay at around like 43%. So not even close. Again, he mentioned to Denver in 2010. Now, this is him being interviewed by the Denver Post. Martindale said, I believe in physical, smart football, and I have an aggressive attitude about things. And that's what you love to hear from a potential defensive coordinator. And I think Martindale is going to be just that for the Giants. Now, could this hiring come back to slap the team in the face? Of course it can. But what this means is the Giants will not be re-signing Lorenzo Carter. O'Shane Ximines is in dear trouble. They're going to build through the secondary. And it very well may be that James Bradberry is a cap casualty this offseason because you could save over $12 million and you want to build a good young secondary. You have guys on their rookie deals and Darnay Holmes and Aaron Robinson. Might as well use them for the time being alongside Adoree Jackson, where Bradberry is approaching 30 here, and he has no ties to Joe Shane and this new regime coming in. Not to mention that Patrick Graham is also gone now, and the only assistant defensive coach retained was Jerome Henderson, who happens to be the defensive backs coach. So if Henderson has a say in any of this, maybe it could convince Martindale and Joe Shane, hey, let's keep James Bradberry around to continue to groom these younger players. But you look at the Giants secondary, right? Jabril Peppers suffered a season-ending injury. He'll probably walk. They're not bringing him back, in my opinion, unless Peppers realizes, well, my value's down because of my injury. Maybe I'll come back on like a 1-year, $6 million deal with the Giants. I don't see that happening. The Giants definitely wanted to keep Jabril Peppers because they did give him the fifth-year option last year. But I don't think it's meant to be anymore. You have Xavier McKinney, who had an awesome second year with the Giants. In my opinion, he was the best player on the team defensively. And you have Logan Ryan, who's the veteran back there. You have Adoree Jackson, who you just spent a lot of money on, 3-year, $39 million deal. Most of that contract was front-loaded. And then you have Darnay Holmes. You have Aaron Robinson. You drafted Rodarius Williams last year. I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants draft a secondary piece in the first round of this year's draft. The Buffalo Bills did it with Tre'Davious White. So I wouldn't be shocked. Would it be my first preference? No. But due to the Wink Martindale hiring, it's very likely. Yes, the offensive line will still be emphasized, but it's very important to note that Wink Martindale is probably going to be the assistant head coach as well. That was the role that Patrick Graham assumed when he came to the Giants. We mentioned, well, we don't think Mike Kafka is ready. We want him to simply just focus on the offense. Wink is going to be the assistant head coach of this football team, ladies and gentlemen. He's been interviewed for head coaching positions numerous times now, and I think he's more than qualified to be the right-hand man to Brian Daboll. When you look at, the head coach and the offensive coordinator, both young guys, Wink Martindale, who's in his mid to late 50s, brings a lot of experience to the game of football and has been around the block a few times. So I think this is a hire that the Giants needed to do. It needed to be either him or Vic Fangio. No young defensive coordinator. You want an experienced guy who brings a lot to the table, and he is a blitzkrieg. That's for sure. I think the secondary, too, this is a good fit for Wink because the secondary is a strong suit for the Giants defensively because of all the names I had just mentioned. So this hire makes a lot of sense for the Giants. I feel like we all saw this coming for the past 2 weeks. It was only a matter of time. And having a strong secondary, like the Giants do, allows the front seven to blitz a lot more. Granted, why rookie Azeez Ojulari had 8 sacks this season, right? A lot of sacks in the NFL are coverage sacks. So it'll be interesting to see how Joe Shane, Brian Daboll, Wink Martindale fill out the rest of this defensive coaching staff. We know Jerome Henderson will stay as the DB coach. Kevin Scherer will not return as the linebackers coach. And then, of course, Sean Spencer left for Florida, Coach Chaos. So the Giants need to fill in the holes of defensive line coach and linebackers coach. Obviously, you still have some other assistants on the staff as well, but the big names that coach each position unit group is what's left to be seen in the coming days. So Another piece to the puzzle of this 2022 Giants coaching staff has been figured out as Wink Martindale becomes Big Blue's new defensive coordinator. Folks, if you like what you watch, make sure to subscribe to the channel below on YouTube at Big Blue Avenue. Give us a follow on Instagram and Twitter as well, and tune in to our Facebook live stream season finale Thursday night at 7 p.m. We're not going anywhere. It's our last Facebook live stream of the season. Now that the head coach and GM are in place, so the coaching staff is beginning to fill out, we feel it's best to be YouTube exclusive for the rest of the offseason. Folks, thank you all very much. And without further ado, let's go Big Blue.